So our topic for tonight is BiShvat, which is coming around the bend this Sunday night, Monday. And I'd like to discuss BiShvat first on a halachic basis, and then we'll see if we can find some more deeper Pnimius HaTorah based on Rabbi Nassan in BiShvat. So we begin by discussing Orla. And Orla is really a main topic for BiShvat, which means that the first 3 years of the produce of a tree is prohibited not only in Achil, but also in Hano. You basically have to get rid of it. And then the 4th year is called Ravai, and that has the same status as Maaser Sheni. It has to be brought up to Yerushalayim and eaten b'kedusha in Yerushalayim. Now, what we're going to try to figure out tonight is when exactly is Rosh Hashanah Le'ilanos. Because as far as Tvua is concerned, which means grains, the 5 species of grains, Rosh Hashanah is Aleph Tishrei. But yet, with regard to Peiros HaIlan, Rosh Hashanah is in Shvat, whether it's the first day of Shvat, that's according to Beit Shammai, or the 15th day of Shvat, according to Beis Hillel. And what this means is the following. The critical moment for determining the year of Peiros HaIlan is called Chanota. We'll see in a few minutes exactly what Chanota means, at least according to Rashi. Now, you can have fruits that reach Chanota into the 3rd year. That means after Rosh Hashanah Aleph Tishrei, but before BiShvat. We're going now according to Beis Hillel. So it's in the 3rd year, before the 4th year, and it's Orla. Now, again, it's interesting because Rosh Hashanah, as far as Tvua is concerned, for example, was already on Aleph Tishrei. Mm-hmm. So from the perspective of Rosh Hashanah, if these peiros reach Chanota after Rosh Hashanah, but before BiShvat, then they really already belong to the 4th year, and they're not the 3rd year. How are you, David? Yeah. Back from the holy parts of New York, I should say.
I'm in Detroit.
You were mostly in Detroit?
I just had a layover.
So you only one night in New York?
No, not even. I just...
Wow. Just from JFK, you made a
trip to the
I'm not going to ask you what the weather conditions are like in Detroit these days.
Yeah, caught in a snowstorm.
Yeah. What's the name of that town? What is it called? Ottawa? No, it's some Canadian town that's across the river from Windsor.
That's where my grandmother lived. That's where
her. Because people told me that about this time of the year, I don't know this year, but you can skate across. I don't know how it does with border control, but you can skate across the Frozen River from one country to another. So listen to the case that we're discussing, David. We're talking about Peiros HaIlan that reached the state of Chanota. We haven't discussed what Chanota is yet. After the 3rd year, past Rosh Hashanah, but before the 4th year. So they reach Chanota somewhere into the 4th year. And the Gemara tells us in Masechet Rosh Hashanah Daf Yud that there are Surim Mishum Orla. Orla is only the first 3 years. He's already in the 4th year, but it's still Orla. Why is it Orla? Because the Gemara says that although Aleph Tishrei is Rosh Hashanah Litvua, so from a perspective of Tvua of the 5 grains, you're already in the 4th year, but from the perspective of Peiros HaIlan, you're not past that year until you reach BiShvat. So BiShvat becomes Rosh Hashanah. So how many months do we have from Tishrei? We have Tishrei, Cheshvan, Kislev, Teves, Shvat, almost 5 months. And during that 5-month period, even though technically you're in the 4th year, but as far as Orla is concerned, which is Peiros HaIlan, you're in the 3rd year.
Well, didn't we start counting from BiShvat to determine the year?
Well, let's say, for example, you planted, the day after, on Tzom Gedalia, you planted the tree, or the tree started producing fruits on Tzom Gedalia. So if you're going to count 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, then by the time you get to Rosh Hashanah on the 3rd year into the 4th year, but the Gemara is saying, no, we're going to count the years by BiShvat. And the Gemara says, Minolan, how do we know? How could it be that with regard to Tvua, Rosh Hashanah is Aleph Tishrei, and yet with regard to Peiros HaIlan, we have a different Rosh Hashanah, and that's BiShvat. And the Gemara says, Amar Kra,
So David's saying that the year for the fruits should start on Tu B'Shvat.
So are you gonna completely cross out, all the growth of the fruit from Aleph Tishrei till Tu B'Shvat of the first year?
No,
Well, what's the halacha
that's
of the year?
I don't know.
that would
I
be
don't think there is such
That would
halacha.
be the first year.
That would be the first year.
Once you pass Tu B'Shvat, second year already.
Correct. And how do we know this? In other words, obviously, we're substituting Tu B'Shvat for Aleph Tishrei.
Okay.
So it's a brand new Rosh Hashanah.
From the Mishnah, from Rosh Hashanah.
No, but how does the Mishnah know it?
Oh,
Is there any indication in the Torah that Tu B'Shvat is Rosh Hashanah Lilanos? So the Gemara says, Amar Kra, if we read carefully the Parsha of Orla, it says, Ubeshana HaRevius, Ubeshana HaChamishis. Why is the Torah talking about the fourth and the fifth year? We should be talking about the third and the fourth year. The third year is still Orla, and then the fourth year is Revai. But yet the Torah emphasized the fifth year. So the Gemara says, based on this diuk in the pasuk, Pa'amim sheberevius, it might be technically in the fourth year if you go by Aleph Tishrei, but Adayin Asura Mishum Orla. So you've already passed the fourth year from the perspective of Aleph Tishrei for Rosh Hashanah L'Tfuah, and yet it's still Asa Mishum Orla because we're going to consider it the fourth year because it reached Chanota before Tu B'Shvat of the fifth year. Anything that reaches Tu B'Shvat, Chanot of Tu B'Shvat before the fifth year is considered the fourth year, and therefore it's Aser Mishum Orla. So that's why the Torah used the word B'Shana Chamishis.
You're saving up Chanata, but what's the basic meaning of Chanata?
So we're going to get to Chanot in a few minutes. I just want you to accept how I tell you. We're just going to accept the concept of Chanota like as an abstract concept. Okay. Now, we have halach of Tu B'Shvat with regard to Maser. What does it mean? If you take a Shemitah cycle that's made up of 6 years, then on the first, second, fourth, and fifth years, you have to be Mafresh Maser Sheni. On the third and the sixth year, instead of Maser Sheni, you're Mafresh Maser Oni. I mean, again, if we had a whiteboard, we could chart this all out, but we don't have the time for that right now tonight. But the Gemara says that as far as Peiros HaElon, to determine what year you're up to in the Maser year, because you have to know whether you chayv Maser Sheni or Maser Ani, it depends on Tu B'Shvat. So Tosfos says, I don't understand. We have arrived at the conclusion that Tu B'Shvat is Rosh Hashanah Lilanos as far as Orla is concerned. How do we know that Tu B'Shvat is Rosh Hashanah Lilanos as far as Maser is concerned? And Tosfos answers that we should take a look in the Yerushalmi. Okay, so Yerushalmi actually raises this question and tries to understand why is Tu B'Shvat chosen as Rosh Hashanah. In fact, as far as Peiros HaElon is concerned, all we have is this pasuk that tells me that you could have Orla in the fifth year, which means that the fourth year doesn't complete itself at Aleph Tishrei. But between Aleph Tishrei and the next year, you have a whole year. How do you know that the ball falls on Shvat? Do you follow the question? So the Gemara in Yerushalmi offers two answers. One answer, the Gemara doesn't identify who said what. It's a machlokas between Rav Zeiri and Rav Ila. In any event, Chad Amar, according to one opinion, what's unique about Tu B'Shvat? Kvar Yatzu Rov Gishmei Shana Kula. Most of the rains have fallen by Tu B'Shvat. Again, we're going according to Eretz Yisrael. Again, in other countries, it'll be totally different. But here in Eretz Yisrael, when the winter season starts, let's say around Cheshvan time, by the time you get Cheshvan, Kislev, Teves, Shvat, you're already 4 months into the Mos HaGeshamim. By that time, most of the rains have already fallen. Then the Gemara quotes another opinion that says the following: Ad kan hein chayim mimei hashana sha'avra, mikan v'elech hein chayim mimei hashana haba. And we're going to try to explain that. By the way, I sent this out. If you want to look in, it's up to you. I always wonder if it's worth the effort that we make here to send this out. Okay. Now, in the Bavli itself, we only have the first answer, the first opinion. That means that most of the rains of the winter season have already fallen by Tu B'Shvat. And Rashi explains, listen carefully, Hoil v'yatzu rov gishmei shana, Kfar ovar rov yemos hagshamim shehuzman revia. And now Rashi is going to tell us what chanota is. Listen carefully. He says, "V'ola hasraf be'ilono." Sraf means the moisture, right? The sap, I guess you'd say in English. V'ola sap be'ilonos. In other words, the ground is already saturated with water, such that now the water it penetrates into the roots of the tree. And once the roots of the tree are saturated with this saraf, with this sap, nimtzu peros chontimiata. Now we're reaching the state of peros, of chanot and peros. Now I ask you the following question, be honest with me. If Rashi is telling us that after the ground has absorbed the waters of the rain, and now the tree has within it enough moisture to produce fruit, what do you see on the tree? What does the tree look like? Nothing. There are no fruits on the tree. And basically what Rashi is telling us, that's why I wanted to push off our discussion about chanota, is that chanota is not something that you could see with the naked eye.
What is chanota?
That's what I'm telling you. Chanota means that the tree has enough moisture to produce fruits. In other words, if no more water would fall from the skies, nevertheless, there would be fruits on the tree. When are the fruits going to actually show up? It's going to take a while. It could take months. So that the idea of chanot, according to Rashi, is purely in potential. You know, when I was a kid, we used to say at Tu BiShvat, let's go out and see, the buds on the tree, the almond trees and all this stuff. You remember all the songs, Shkedia Parachas, you remember all that? Well, according to Rashi, there's no Shkedia Parachas here, because when you get to Tu BiShvat, the tree has the potential to produce fruit, but the fruit is not there. I'll only see the fruit much later on. It's kind of like, if I could give a comparison, you could be in the 8th year of Shemitah, you could be in the 9th year of Shemitah, you could be in the 10th year of Shemitah, and you're still getting Shemitah products from the 2nd year. They were produced in the 2nd year, in the 7th year, but you didn't get them. They didn't reach the marketplace for years. Let's say, for example, if you don't rely on the head to Mechira, you could buy wine 3 years from now, and I promise you there's a good chance that wine will be head to Mechira from 3 years early. And that's what we're saying. What are you saying?
Is that in practice?
That's true. Gedaliah, take me wine purchasing 3 years from now, and I promise you every other bottle will say head to Mechira on it. Because wine is produced during the Shemitah year, and then it's sold years and years down the line. But getting back to our case here, Rashi is saying that the fruits reach chanota, and you don't even see the fruits. Because chanota, according to Rashi, is the description of the potential of the tree producing fruits, but the fruits might not come out for who knows how long. But those fruits already had chanota at Tu BiShvat much earlier, because at that point, most of the rains of that winter year have fallen already. So the ground is saturated with water. It has enough moisture to now produce whatever fruits will come later on.
Well, in that first case, you said, when I first walked in, you said that the fruits have reached Chanata, but it's now after Rosh Hashanah in the
Fourth year, if you go by the Rosh Hashanah of Aleph Tishri.
But we're talking about there being fruit, or we're saying no.
No. The fruit haven't come out yet, according to Rashi. But the Chanot has come because most of the rains have fallen. But let's say the rains haven't fallen yet, so then there's no Chanota. And that's going to be the second opinion that I mentioned in the name of the Yerushalmi. The Yerushalmi has another opinion that says what? That, listen carefully, Ad kan hein chayim imei hashana sha'avra, mikan v'elech hein chayim imei hashana haba. The Ran explains this Yerushalmi. The Ran says that according to this opinion, the Yerushalmi, which is not quoted in the Bavli, what happens is that if you see fruits that grew after, well, let me start. If you see fruits that grew or reached Chanot, according to Rashi, before Tu BiShvat, which waters were responsible for the growth of that fruit? What's the answer? Last year's water. What do I mean by last year? Before what? Before Aleph Tishrei, meaning way back a winter ago, almost a full year ago. But if you see fruit that reaches the state of Chanot, again, you won't know it for a few months, but it reached Chanot after Tu BiShvat, which rains were responsible for the growth of this fruit?
This year.
This year's fruit. When you say this year, means post Aleph Tishrei. So here's where Brisk Torah comes in. Just to give you a little bit of Brisk, a taste of Brisk over here. When we say that Tu BiShvat is Rosh Hashanah Ilanos, is that really true? It depends. If you go with the first opinion of Yerushalmi, which is quoted in the Bavli, namely Kvar Yardu Rov Gishmei Hashana, then you could say that there's actually something in the season that changes at Tu BiShvat. What changed? Now you've got more than 50% of the rains of that winter. So the halacha says that since the rains are going to be responsible for the production of the fruit, that's called Rosh Hashanah. So that means that inherently in Tu BiShvat, we have Rosh Hashanah Lilanos. But if you go with the second opinion, that of Yerushalmi, we're only trying to determine whether or not the rains of last year were responsible for the produce or the rains of this year. And it all depends on what year. When does the year begin? Aleph Tishrei. So in effect, really, Aleph Tishrei is Rosh Hashanah L'Peros Ha'Ilan, just as it is to Tvuah. Just that we need Tu BiShvat as what in Brisk we call a Gili Milsa. What's a Gili Milsa? That's a very important term in Brisk Torah. Gili Milsa means there's nothing inherent in the action that took place, the event that took place, but just that this event now sheds a light, that's called a Gili Milsa, on the reality. So we're going to look at this fruit that reaches Chanota after Tu BiShvat, and we're going to say the rains that were responsible for this Chanota were this year's rains, meaning after Aleph Tishrei. But Aleph Tishrei remains Rosh Hashanah Lilanos. If, on the other hand, the Peros reach Chanota before Tu BiShvat, then it's a Gili Milsa that they're going to grow and be produced on the tree as a result of last year's rains. But when you talk about which year you're up to, it's always going to be Aleph Tishrei. So there's a fundamental machlokas here. And again, I don't want to, in any way disappoint those who like to celebrate Tu BiShvat, like we're going to celebrate Tu BiShvat, right? But that only works out according to one opinion. Because according to the other opinion, Tu BiShvat is nothing more than a Gili Milsa to tell me which rains this year or last year's rains are responsible for the produce of this fruit. So that's as far as Brisk is concerned. Now, what I'd like
a date to determine, just like a marker.
Correct, exactly. It's a marker. It's a Gili Milsa. It's a Siman L'Dover. It's not a Siva L'Dover. There's nothing inherent in this date. And this is going to be a tremendous issue because the Gemara says that according to Beit Shammai, Rosh Hashanah Lilanos is Aleph Shvat. And in the Yerushalmi, the Gemara says, why did Beit Shammai reject Beis Hillel? And Beit Shammai quotes the following principle: Ein Shana Achas Mechulekes L'Shnei Chadashim. No, I'm sorry. Ein Chodesh Echad Mechulak L'Shtei Shonim. You can't have 1 month, half of which belongs to the previous year, and the other half belongs to the new year. Well, that's only true if you hold the Rosh Hashanah Lilanos. And then Beit Shammai have a very good argument against Beis Hillel. How can you come up with Tu BiShvat? Because then you're splitting the month, half of which belongs to last year, and the half of which belongs to the new year. But if you're going to say, like that opinion Yerushalmi, that it's only a Gili Milsa and it's a marker to determine which rains, last year's rains before Aleph Tishrei, or this year's rains after Tishrei, are responsible for the produce of these fruits, then we're not splitting a month into 2 halves. We're going back to Aleph Tishrei. We just need a marker to know which rains, last year's rains or this year's rains, are going to be responsible for the produce.
It's asking maybe more tipping towards the idea that it's a Gili Milsa.
And in that be the case, that's a Gili Milsa, then Beit Shammai has no argument against Beis Hillel. But the fascinating thing, again, this is not a topic for tonight, is that Rabbi Akiva was machmir for Beit Shammai, which is fascinating because we never, the rule of thumb is that Beit Shammai b'mokum Beis Hillel lav mishnah. We don't even pay any attention to Beit Shammai. But Rabbi Akiva actually was mafresh 2 different maasros. One meiser based on Beis Hillel and the other meiser based on Beit Shammai. in a case where it grew, to a point of Chanata between Aleph Shvat and Tu B'Shvat. Okay. Now again, if you have the pages I sent you, I'm not sure which you have first. You have Orla Hay or Orla Gimel? Because I would like to start with Orla Hay. And in my text, this is on page 348. If you have the same, usually it's the same in all editions of Likutei Halachos. David, you have page 348?
Yeah.
Okay, Orla Hay. So he tells you that he's going to build a thesis about Orla based on Likutei Moharan, Siman Yudal. And as usual, Rabbi Nosson always says, Ayin Sham Kol Torah. Usually he says, Mitchilos of Yad Sofa. Okay. Now it's interesting, in the printing of Likutei Halachos, first they bring the parsha of Orla. If you take a look, V'chisavo el haaretz unetatem kol eitz machol shalosh shonim yilachem arelim u'v'shana revius yeh kol pirio kodesh ilulim lashem, etc. And then it says b'shana chamishis. We mentioned earlier that that's an important phrase, b'shana chamishis. He says the following. Rabbi Nachman taught us, she'ein adam zochel Torah ki im al yidei shifus. If I would ask you the following question, which personality, which individual is most representative or personifies Torah, which person would you put your finger to? Moshe. And which person in all of the Bible would personify shifus? Again, it would be Moshe Rabbeinu, because the Torah testifies about Moshe, Ha'ish Anav Mikol Adam. Now, again, there may be nuances of differences between shiflus and anova, but that's not for us tonight. So that it's not coincidental that Moshe is going to be the receiver of the Torah, the transmitter of the Torah, and at the same time, Moshe is a personification of shiflus, because ain't Torah without shiflus. So what's antithetical to Torah if Torah has to be identified with shiflus? Gaiva. So Gaiva and Torah are mutually exclusive. They're like magnets, opposite directions, pull each other apart. And then he says the following, that in shiflus, there are 4 different dimensions of shiflus. Number 1, lahachtin atzmo ifnei gedolim mimenu. Occasionally you meet people, they're standing in front of the Gadol Hadar, and they think they know better than the Gadol Hadar. So the first level of shiflus, perhaps the easiest level, is to feel shuffle in front of someone who's greater than you. Number 2, lifnei b'nei adam ke'erko. Even in the presence of someone who's on your level, again, feel shiflus. Feel that he has something greater than you. And then we get to the 3rd level. V'lifnei k'tana b'menu. He's in the presence of someone who's on a much lower level. But yet, he acknowledges that that person has so much to give him. And he has a shiflus even vis-a-vis someone who's katan mimenu. But wait a second, Rabbi Nachman says there are 4 different levels of shiflus. Didn't you cover the entire gamut? What's the 4th level? Ulafamim shehu right? I'm sorry. V'tzorech lahaktinis atzmo. This is number 4. Keneged madregas atzmo. He's comparing himself to himself. Like Zusha, why weren't you Zusha, right? V'yadama bi'enov shehula matami madregasel. That he is lower than his own madrega. He doesn't reach up to his own madrega. That's the 4th level of shiflus. Bechinas, and he quotes a pasuk in the parsha that we'll read tomorrow, and day after tomorrow, right? Shvu ish tachtov. And tachtov means below himself. And now, based on this structure that Rabbi Nachman has presented, that there's no Torah without shiflus, and that shiflus breaks up into 4 subcategories and expressions of shiflus, Rabbi Nosson is going to say, I now understand why there are 3 years of an Isur Orla, followed by the 4th year, which is called Ravai. How so? Rabbi Nosson says that based on other Torahs of Rabbi Nachman, there are 3 klipos of tumah. Those 3 klipos of tumah are different levels of klipos, but what's common to all of them is they are klipos koshos. They're very difficult. Tmeos legamri. Tmeos legamri means there's no tzad of salvation. It's pure evil. 3 different klipos that you have to get rid of. It's sort of like you can't be machshir a chazir because it belongs to a min tameh. Min tameh means there's no room for elevating or for salvaging what we call birur, anything for something that's pure tumah. But then we get to the 4th year. The 4th year, the Ravai is keneged b'chinas noga. Noga is something that's sort of parallel, that's parva in the sense that it lends itself to 2 directions. You could find the good, you could find the bad. Shu ma'urav mitov v'ra. V'elu ha'arba klipos sarchan u'levatlam l'sham. You have to overcome all these 4 levels of klipa. And these 4 klipos, which are tmeos legamre, have to be struggled with during the course of your lifetime. The ikar hanisayon ubechira shal adam lamod keneged kol midos ros and imshachos me'la arba klipos. And all the midos ros that we have to overcome and neutralize, are all expressions of these 4 klipos of tumah. The 4 klipos of tumah are the source and the root for all midos ros. Vayidei zeh, if he can remove the klipos. Now, a klipa is something that covers what? A fruit. We're talking about the klipa of a pri. And he has to now overcome the klipa. What comes out after he removes the klipa? The pri itself. The pri is being concealed by the klipa. Ulakach. Now he says another yisod. Listen to this. All 4 klipos tmeos really emanate from one rotten midah, and that is geus, and that is conceit. And conceit itself is another form of avodah zarah. And avodah zarah is the opposite of the Torah. The Torah is the bechin of ayin. Ayin means ein sof. And ayin is really, in a sense, the non-existence of physical reality. It goes above physical reality into the world of the infinite. But when you take the physical world and you make it your number one concern, then you get to a state of geus. And that's the opposite of Torah. That's when you think in terms of avodah zarah. Hefech be'atorah she'ikra anova. So Torah equals anova. Avodah zarah is antithetical to Torah because avodah zarah is a kind of a geus. Okay, geus. By the way, in this week's parsha, or last week's parsha about Paro, Paro made himself into what? Into an avodah zarah. And Paro is full of gaiva. He's full of geus. He says, Mil Hashem, who is this God of yours that I have to listen to? He pumps himself up. And who's going to attack Paro? Who's going to be the Keneged Paro? It's going to be Moshe Rabbeinu, because Moshe Rabbeinu is shiftless. So it's a battle between shiftless and geus. We're going to see this over and over again. In Purim, we're going to see a battle between Mordechai, who's geus, makes himself into what? An avodah zarah, has everyone bowing in front of him. And against Mordechai against Haman is going to be Mordechai and Esther, who represent Anova and Shiflus, and they can be the ones to overcome Haman. In the next paragraph, he establishes the fact that the arba bechinos of klipos, geus kol mikol arba klipos, geus, conceit and haughtiness, really combines within it all 4 klipos. So what does it mean? We have 4 against 4. We're going to have 4 dimensions of shiflus. You remember those 4? Against someone's better than me, someone's equal to me, someone's below me, and even against me. And those 4 levels of shiflus are going to be antithetical to the 4 levels of gaiva that we spoke about, the 4 klipos. And ultimately, the final madrega of the 4 levels of shiflus is going to be shvu ish tachtov, as we discussed earlier. Fine. In the next paragraph, which is number Gimel, Zeu b'china shalosh shnei orla v'neteravai. You remember that we said that there are 3 klipos tmeos, and the 4th klipa was called what? Noga. The 4th klipa can be raised and elevated to kedusha. We don't mess around with the first 3 klipos; they are pure evil. Tmeos legamre, and that's orla. This is the chiddush of Rabbi Nosson. Rabbi Nosson says that the 3 years of orla parallel the 3 klipos of geus. Now we're going to have to figure out what's the relationship between the first 3 years of orla and peros elon and the mid of geus, which expresses itself in the 3 klipos, and therefore the orla is completely prohibited. Can you do anything to be machshir orla? No, even badats can't be machshir orla. You can take all the orla you like and put it into a mikveh, and it could be the Baal Shem Tov's mikveh that we saw, and it wouldn't help you at all because this is pure tumah. We don't mess around with pure tumah. But when it comes to the 4th year, which is connected the 4th klipa, and what do we say was the 4th klipa was noga, which is a mixture of tov and ra. Here we have ravai, and what are we going to do with ravai? Well, we're not allowed to eat ravai, at least not outside of Yerushalayim, but we bring it to Yerushalayim. Now we ask the question: what's the connection between orla, peros ha'ilon, and the 3 years which parallel the 3 klipos, which are tmeos legamre, and geus? Where does geus come into the picture? That's what Rabbi Nosson says here in paragraph number 3, and he says the following: that the peros of a tree need particular attention, meaning particular birur on a spiritual level. And why is that? Shetchilas chet Adam Arishon. Where did Avram Arishon sin? Peros. V'al yidei ha'ilon shu eitz hadas tovara. V'chol cheto haya al yidei geis. I never thought of this. Maybe you guys know this. I don't. That the root cause of Adam Arishon's sin was geus. Built himself up too much. How does Rabbi Nosson know such a thing? What were the words of the Nachash when he seduced them? What did he say, Gedalia?
He was going against God. Hashem told him not to do it. Oh.
It's even more than that. Not only is it a rebellion against God, but you'll be like God. In other words, Adam Arishon sort of succumbs to this unbelievable temptation that I could be like God himself. The Yisem Kelokim. Sharatzel is goes, they wanted to achieve, meaning Adam and Chava, that level of I'm greater, and I can reach even greater and greater. Li Domos, I can be similar in my greatness, Li Atzmo Elyon, to the Rebbeinu Shalom himself. And not only that, the Elon itself looks like a Balgaiva. I mean, it depends what tree you're looking at. But a Elon Betivo Gadol V'Gavoa B'Komasamaot, a sycamore tree or a cedar tree, it shoots up into the ground. I'm a big Balgaiva. That's why a Mitzoro, in the process of Taras HaMitzora, he has to take this very tall tree, and then he makes a mixture with a hyssop, a low branch, a low shrub, in order to indicate that he spoke Lashon Hara because he was a big Baal Gaiva. I'm greater than you, and I can speak against you. So therefore, the Elon represents the Bechina of Geus and Gavus for 2 reasons. Number 1, because of the Elon itself, and number 2, because of the Chet of Adam Arishon, which was a result, and the root of which was what? Was Gaiva. Bechinas ki gavoa rozim, the cedar tree on Govo, the pasuk says in Tanakh, how tall these trees are. Govo, what does Govo mean? Geus, he makes himself into something great. Valkain, his hiraru, the Torah prohibits, araltam or losses period shaloshanim, get rid of these peros, because the first 3 years of the tree parallel the first 3 years of what? The 3 klipos, which are tmeos legamre, and therefore you got to get rid of them. There's nothing you can do to salvage those 3 years of the Arla tree. Ubishana Revias, okay, fine. Now it's the Bechina of Klipas Noga, and now you can rectify it. How can you rectify these peros? By bringing them where? to Yerushalayim. So Rabbi Nosson asks, why Yerushalayim? Where does Yerushalayim fit into this picture? Ki Yerushalayim bechinas yira sholem. The word Yerushalayim is a hybrid word made up of two smaller words, and that's yira, which is the fear of God, and sholem, the greatest level, the perfect ideal yira. What's the perfect ideal yira? Says Rabbi Nosson, anava. Anava, humility, is the pure, perfect, ideal yira. And why is it connected to Yerushalayim now? It's interesting because Yerushalayim is the capital city of Eretz Yisrael, correct? It's Malchus the Kedusha. In other words, Dafka, when I reach the highest level, that's when I need the Anova. And when Yerushalayim is set as the highest level, politically, it's got the center of all the power of the state. That's where the government sits and so forth and so on. That's where we could reach what's called Malchus de Kedusha. I could take the greatest level of Malchus, which means I could be such a highfalutin guy. I think so highly of myself. I'm Balgaiva. I'm at the top of the world. I'm the head of Russia and whatever it is. And then what do I do with it? I convert it to Kedusha because I add the element of what? Of Shiflus. And that's the ultimate Yira. So the ultimate level of perfect Yira is equal to Shiflus. And therefore Yerushalayim, which is the manifestation of the perfect level of Yira, is also the manifestation of Shiflus, because we reach that level of Malchus, and then we make it into Kedusha. And what's the Malchus of Kedusha? That's when somebody reaches a high level, and yet he has Anova. And then he quotes Rabbi Nachman, who says that the Gemara Megillah says, "B'makom Gedu Laso," where you find the greatness of God, Shamata Motzean Venuso. That's where you find God's humility. So the greatest humility is the humility of God, because God reaches the highest level. And therefore, Kishemalim Aperos, in the fourth year, Lisham, to Yerushalayim, Zochim Levatil Levarer Klipas Noga. We take that Klipas Noga that has the negative side to it, and we elevate it to the positive side. What's the positive side? The ultimate Anova of Yerushalayim. Because Yerushalayim is the ultimate ideal level of Yira, represents Shiflus, and Dafka, because of Yerushalayim's greatness, it reaches and achieves the greatest level of Shiflus. And that's the Bechina Revius of Shiflus. Now, we said before that connected the four Klipos, we have to have four levels of what? Of Shiflus. Now you've reached the highest level of Shiflus in the fourth year of Ravai, when you bring the fruits to where? To Yerushalayim Kodesh, and therefore, Sheyeh Shafel V'yonav Tachas Madregesh is a Ikar HaShiflus, Bechinas HaShiflus Shal Moshe Rabbeinu L'Vasholem Shomer Nachnu Ma. Imagine Moshe Rabbeinu is the king of Israel. He's the Makabel HaTorah, and he's the Moser HaTorah, he transmits the Torah, and yet on his level, he reaches Anachnu Ma. Ma means iron, we're nothing. And that's the greatest level of what? Of Shiflus. If you were students of my class, I would tell you to stand. Okay. No, I'm just saying, before, in the old days, before Yarda, what's the Mishnah in Megillah, Yarda Chalishas Lolam, they used to learn standing. Mm-hmm. So apparently, even those days, they had problems with, the lack of sleep, especially someone who's jet lagged. Just got back from Detroit.
Nice ideas that relate to this is that in Divrei Yamin, Adam was written with a big aleph, an oversized aleph. And Vayikra, which relates to Moshe, is a small aleph.
Excellent, beautiful.
Also, yeah.
That's wonderful. So it means that Adam Arishon builds himself up with haughtiness. I'm the greatest, V'isem Kelokim. I'm on the top of the world. No one can compare to me. I'm almost up there with God. And connected that, we have Moshe Rabbeinu, who's the personification of Shiflus, Anachnu Ma. We are nothing.
And Ma'as Chachma, Koach Ma, which is also Bittul.
Correct. Chochmah means iron. It's the ultimate bittul to the Ribono Shel Olam, to Ein Sof. You're part of Ein Sof.
If you don't mind, I add one more nice thing that I think also relates to this, that there's a Hayom Yom. I don't know if it's from the Alter Rebbe. It must be from the Alter Rebbe, where it says that in Mashinim, when you have Kavana for Usa'akir Shabbos Usama'ager, there's a comma in the Alter Rebbe Siddur, and then the Sachniya. The first three relate to the Shlosh Klipos Temeos, total destruction, uproot. Sachnia, you pause the Sachnia, because Noga you could subjugate.
Wow, that's
That's
heavy.
that's a Kavanah when you have
Wow.
Shemona
Is it
Esrei.
based on the Arizal? I wonder.
I think so, yeah.
Must
So
be
if you look
based
at
on-
Alter Rebbe Siddur,
Wow.
there's a comma, then the Sachnia, and he says that you could, that's Klippas Noga.
Wow, that's heavy. Wow.
Same idea.
Now he quotes a pasuk in Zechariah, which describes Yerushalayim at the end of days. And the pasuk says, "V'Rama," Rama means lashon Rome, very high up. V'Yashva tachteha. And what does that mean? V'Makom gdulaso shama tomotzian venusa. V'Rama, it's up there. Yerushalayim is the capital of the whole Malchus, and the more you lift up Yerushalayim, v'tisnasi l'malios, and nevertheless v'Yashva tachteha, it experiences and manifests this level of shiftless. And the highest level, which is number 4, is, you'll see on page 350, lahaktin atzma mimadregas atzma. In other words, when he looks into himself and he sees what potential he has, and he feels like he's not reaching up to his potential. So what happens? We have 4 years, and now the tree is producing in its 5th year. That's fine. Why? When he reaches that last level, the highest level of shiflus, l'shaber gavaso b'arba, right? He had 4 different dimensions of shiflus to overcome and neutralize the 4 levels of gaiva. Then b'china shviras ubital arba klipos, he's destroyed and undermined all these 4 klipos, which contain within it all the midos ros, as we said before. Azai, at that point, to zocha likolel the arba osios Hashem. Wow. Now he reaches the level, having overcome all the midos ros, cleaned himself up. Now he reaches Yud Kei Vav Kei. And not only that, Yud Kei Vav Kei is the shoresh of number 1, the arba yisodos, Eish, Ruach, Mayim, Ofer, again the number 4. And that's the Bechin of Domem, Someach, Chaim, and Taber, again the number 4. And all of these have klipos that surround them. And now he was successful in destroying the klipos. He was able to do the ultimate birur of all the Arba Yisodos, and now he's included and he's sort of connected to the 4 osios of Yud Kei Vav Kei. Now he's ready to eat the fruits of the 5th year. And now I want to fast forward to paragraph number Hey. V'zeu b'chinas kriyas yamsuf. Okay, now watch what happens. We are about to enter into the new year of Peros HaElam, which is going to start this Sunday night on Tu BiShvat. We are also about to read the Parsha of Kriyas Yamsuf. And Rabbi Nosson says, I'm just going to quote to you from page 325 for a second, I don't want to lose that place. He says, Mashakorin Shira Sayam Li Olam B'Chodesh Shvat. Did you ever pay attention to that? That we always read Kriyas Yamsuf, Parsha Shira, in the month of Shvat. And not only that, he says, Samach L'Chamisha Sar B'Shvat, Shu Rosh Hashanah Lilanos. What's the connection between Kriyat Shema? I'm sorry, did I say Kriyat Shema? I meant to say Kriyas Yamsuf. If you think I'm nervous, you got me right. Okay. So what's the connection between Kriyas Yamsuf and Tu BiShvat, which is Rosh Hashanah Lilanos? He says, Chamisha Sar B'Shvat, Hu Li'olam Samach L'Shabbat Shira. U'lefamim Chal Shabbat Shira B'Chamisha Sar B'Shvat V'Atzmo. Excuse me. I know there's a Mecham Mayim here, but it's not on. So
You want some hot water?
well, how much time do we have? Oh, we don't have too much time.
Only take 2 minutes to eat, it's a kumkum.
You know what? Do me a favor, David. See if there's any even warm water left in the kumkum.
I'll turn around, I'll go back in a minute.
No, I'll tell you what it is, David. I won't be able to drink it if it's boiling hot, so I won't lower Vakli Klum. So again, Rabbosai, we're trying to understand why is it that Kriyas Yamsuf always, the reading always coincides with Shvat, and even more so it's either right before, right after, or on Tu B'Shvat itself. What's the connection between Kriyas Yamsuf and Tu B'Shvat? Says Rabbi Nosson that Moshe is going to raise his staff, his mater, and he's going to create what? With the mater, Kriyas Yamsuf. What happens over here? So we're looking at Os Hey on page 350, and he says that what is Paro? Well, thank you so much. Perfect. Paro is going to be destroyed by what? By Kriyas Yamsuf. That's the ultimate destruction of Paro. Who is Paro? Paro says, Mi Hashem, who is God? Paro is the one, according to Yechezkel Hanavi, who says, Leah Ori, the Nile is mine. Ani Asitiv, I created the Nile. Valkein, if Paro is the manifestation of Geus, which means the four klipos that we spoke about before, then who's going to bring Paro down? Who's going to raise his staff and split the Yam and bury Paro and all his people? Alkein Ha'geula say they Moshe. Shehu Anav miod mikol Adam fi Omar Nachnu Ma Bechinas Tachlis HaShiflus. Okay, David, we're in paragraph number Hey on the bottom of page 350. And therefore, Alkein Iker Gemara Geula Hoya Kriyas Yamsuf. Now, I understand why Moshe Rabbeinu Keneged Paro is Shiflus against Geus, and therefore Paro is going to be brought down by Moshe. But what I don't understand is, what does this have to do with Kriyas Yamsuf? Where do we see that the Geula has to come about through Tachlis HaShiflus from Kriyas Yamsuf? Says Rabbi Nosson, Shehafach Yam Liabosha. Yam, as we'll soon see, is going to represent Geus, and it lords itself over the Abosha, over the ground, like the waves, trying to, what is the word I want to use? Trying to drown the dry land. He says, Iker Anovu Bechinas Afar, right? We always say in davening, Nafshi Kafar L'chol. It means we should be like Afar. Yasim Atzma Kafar. Hamayim. And he says the following, right? Mayim has to do with Tzomeach, so you start with Domain, which is Ofar, and then you go up to Tzomeach, and the Mayim fits in with Tzomeach because it causes everything to grow. But more than that, he says, we're talking about Galim. Galim means waves, right? And when it comes to waves, the Torah always adds a word that indicates sort of the gaiva of the waves, like Haim Roshim, right? You hear the loud noise of the waves, correct? Umisnasim atzman, and the waves lift themselves up, as it says in Tehillim, Vateromem Galav, Shezeu Bechinas Geus. So water is now, the water of the sea represents Geus, but what's going to happen to the water of the sea? It's going to split to make room for what? For the Abasha, correct? And that's what he says over here. Shehafach Hayam, which represents Geus, Vateromim Galav, to Abasha. How do we know that Yam equals Geus? Ato Moshel Begeus Hayam. Here's the pasuk itself, puts Geus together with Yam. Avol HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we're up to page 351, Sam Chol Gvul Yam. Chol is Afar, representing Shiflus, and that's going to contain the Yam. Or in the case of Kriyas Yamsuf, the Yam is going to have to split in favor of the Abasha. Shehu Bechinas Yisoda Afar, Shemeshaber Gavasa. And now we begin to appreciate what Tu B'Shvat is all about. Because Tu B'Shvat is Rosh Hashanah Lilanos, which means that this is the month of the Ilanos. And what is the idea of observing Orla and the transition between the first 3 years and the fourth year into the fifth year? It's all about fixing up the Chet of Adam HaRishon. What was the Chet of Adam HaRishon? Gaiva. And now we're going to fix that up and be metaking it with Shiflus. And I'm going to reach the ultimate fourth level of Shiflus about Klape Atzmo in the fourth year, which is Neter Avai. And Klal Yisrael, as an entity, represent Anova, as the pasuk says in Dvarim Perek Zayin, Ki atem ma'at mikol ha'amin. And why is that? Say Chazal in the Gemara Klulin, Ki heim klulin b'Moshe. We are all connected to Moshe Rabbeinu Haya Anav Ma'od. So now we have a case where the Yam, which represents Gaiva, is running away from Moshe Rabbeinu, running away from Bnei Yisrael by splitting and allowing Bnei Yisrael to go into the Yabasha, because it's the Anivus of Moshe Rabbeinu that's going to expose the Afar and the Yabasha, pushing aside these haughty waves and making it into a Yabasha, which is Afar, which is Shiflus. And therefore, the opening pasuk of the Shira says, Ashir Hashem ki ga'o, and then ga'ah. Says Unkelis, what's ga'o, and then ga'ah? Is Gai, God rules over Gevanusa, those who are Bali Gaiva. And that's exactly what Kriyas Yamsuf is about, to destroy the Gaiva of Paro. And to replace the Gaiva of Paro with Hashem Yimloch Olam Va'ed, with Bittul to Hashem. Hashem Malach Geus Lavesh. Hashem is the Geus, and we're going to overcome and destroy the Geus of Paro in favor of the Geus of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. V'zeh b'chinas number vav, chamisha asar BiShvat, shu Rosh Hashanah lilonos. Now, what month is Shvat in the calendar numbers of months? Starting from Nisan, because HaChodesh HaZelachem, Rosh Chodashim. So as far as Chodashim is concerned, the first month of the year is Nisan. What number are we up to now in Shvat? 11. This is the 11th month of the year. What's the significance of the fact that this is the 11th month of the year? He says the following, that the Shvatim, the word Shevet, is a branch that a Yotzim Mi'ilan HaKadosh. So you have Yaakov Avinu, and you have the 12 branches that come from Yaakov Avinu. The Elu Shneimasa Shvatim Klulim Bi'arba Machnos HaShchina. We divide up the 12 Shvatim into 4 Machnos, 3 Shvatim in each one of the Machnos, and they get 4 Degolim, 4 super duper, flags. Kenegdom Hem Arba Tkufas HaShana. And they parallel and correspond to the 4 periods and the 4 seasons of the year. V'chol Elu, and all of these, meaning the Machnos of Shechina, the Arba Degolim, the Tkufas HaShana, they all come from what? The Arba Osios Vashem of Yud Kei Vav Keshem Misham Nimshachim Ha'arba Mochin. There are 4 levels of Moach. Umisham Arba Yisoda Shem B'chinas Slas Gavne. Fine. Now we're going to talk about Tu BiShvat. So Tu BiShvat, we said, was the Bechina of cleaning out all this Tumah of 4 years worth of Arla of Tumah, which represent the 4 Klipos, which are identical with Gaiva and Geus. So now we're going to do the Tikkun, and we're going to have what? We're going to have Shiflus, as we said earlier, that the reason why B'Shana Chamish is Tochlu Espirio, because we were Zocha to defeat the Gaiva of the 4 Bechinas of Gaiva with the 4 Bechinas of Shiflus by getting rid of our Arla, and now we're ready to reach the highest level of the number 4, which parallels all the different things that we spoke about here in number Dalet. And therefore, once we've reached that level of Birur, we have the Shiflus that's defeated the Geus, and as a result of that, in this month of Shvat, we are now ready for absolute Shiflus to destroy and overcome Geus, and that's what Kriyas Yamsuf is all about, when the Abasha will reign over the Yam, because Hafach HaYam Li'Abasha. Now, we ran out of a little bit of time, but I just do want to point out that back in Gimel, which you have also, we have a discussion about the number 11. And why is it so significant that Shvat is the 11th month? And basically, if you take a look on page 322, which I think you have, Rabbi Nosson points out that the number 11 represents the 11 Samamonim in the Ketores. And the Ketores represents the ability to create a reach tov even when there's a reach ra. And this is a very fundamental principle in Breslav, but just going beyond that, what's going on is that one of the 11 elements of the Ketores is what? Is chelban, and chelban has a bad smell. But we're going to integrate the chelban and uplift it in such a way that when it's connected with the other 10 samamonim, it becomes a reach tov. And that's the idea of converting and elevating tov into ra. Nimtza. And he says that how can we actually take something that's got a bad smell, so to speak, meaning it's foul and it's tameh and it's asur, and convert it to something mutter. And in order to explain this, Rabbi Nosson has a concept called tefillah mibchinas din. And what does that mean, tefillah mibchinas din? It means the ability to overcome that which is actually ra. And that's only someone who's very special, and he could reach the level of tefillah b'bchinas din. Now, tefillah b'bchinas din in Breslav is one of those fundamental concepts that requires hours and hours of work. That's the way Pinchas was able to be successful against what was his name, Zimri, and that's the way Mordechai and Esther were able to defeat Haman. And elsewhere, Rabbi Nosson talks about Moshe Rabbeinu defeating Og Melech HaBashan. Anyway, in all these cases, there's tefillah b'chinas din. Now, tefillah b'chinas din is very, very dangerous. And the Breslavers will tell you to avoid it at all costs. Basically, tefillah b'chinas din is when a tzaddik says, I demand the following. And we have a halacha called tzaddik gozer v'HaKadosh Baruch Hu mekayim. And the ability of tefillah b'chinas din is to actually enter into the ra and somehow free that element of tov that's trapped in the ra, what we call the tzitzos of kedusha. In any event, that's called tefillah b'chinas din. And what happens is that Pinchas is able to overcome Zimri. What shevet is Zimri from? Shimon. Shimon has a very special kind of potential for bad, and Zimri represents that type of niyuf. And Pinchas is able to overcome Taimas Niyuf and make that ultimate tikkun of Yesod through his power. Now, Moshe Rabbeinu, when he gives out the brachos and the klolos, he leaves out Shimon. Shimon is omitted. So at the end of the day, there are only 11. So only the 11 Shvat, because Shimon is got to be given special care and special attention. In any event, he says the following, that since the 11th month parallels the 11 Samamonim, we can do an ultimate birur even on the sin of Adam Arishon shepagam be'etz hadas, and the takana and the tikkun of eitz hadas of that chet of Adam Arishon is going to be the 11 Samamonim of the Ketores, which is equal to tefillah mebchinas din. And Shvat, which is the number 11, has within it the potential for that tikkun of tefillah b'chinas din. And that's what Shvat, as the 11th month, which is connected to the 11 brachos of the 11 Shvatim, can defeat even another shevet, which again represents that potential of Taivas Niyuv, and to clear the way for that. And that's why the month of Shvat is a perfect month for Tikkun, and it's called Rosh Hashanah Le'ilanos. So again, we did not cover everything that I wanted to, but we covered a lot of major concepts here in Rabbi Nosson's Torah, and we should think about that. The 4 klipos and the 4 expressions or dimensions of Gaiva, and they all come, and all the midos rows come from them, and connected those 4. We have the 4 dimensions of Shiflus, and the ultimate level of Shiflus corresponds to the ultimate klipo, which is klipas noga, which can be subject to birur, and that's Kodesh Hilulim Lashem, and we bring that up to Yerushalayim, because Yerushalayim is the bechina of the ultimate yira, which is Shiflus. And why do we read this all about Kriyas Yamsuf before Tu BiShvat? Those are some of the topics that we covered tonight. So I want to take this opportunity to thank you so much for coming. And you should have a great Shabbos, and we should be zocher to more nisim in the flows in which shiflus will overcome gaiva, and that's something that will allow us in Mirz Hashem, once that happens, to again return to the Ukraine, because we'll defeat the ultimate personification of gaiva in our time, if you know what I'm talking about. Okay then? All right, Shabbat Shalom. Thank you so much. Good.